quite alarming. It's also a little sad. I understand that there are things on either side that are a problem. Companies don't have the infrastructure for it in certain cases, or the flexibility that is needed. But there's also a whole thing on the other side, right? Which is where you're sitting at and you're trying to apply for jobs. So let's try and cater to the bits that are within your control, and I'll go over some of them. We can go to the next slide. Okay, while the slide's coming up, what I wanted to cover is basically things that you need to keep in mind while you're looking at re-entering the workforce, right? One of it is how you look at an opportunity that comes your way. So something as simple as, staying within your comfort zone. So to be able to look at roles that you possibly can do, maybe something that you've done in the past. When you're coming back after a long break, I would recommend not looking at something too complex, not looking at something that will need too much of your time and energy to learn, to figure out, especially if you're looking at a situation where your life at home is also going to need your time, it's a new territory for you, right? So to be able to juggle that, stick to something that is within your comfort zone. The second thing I wanted to talk about is how I think all of you at some point have worked. All of you have been part of a corporate setup. You need to trust yourself. You need to remain confident through the process. Now, as a recruiter, I can tell you that it's very common for us to see women who are trying to re-enter the workforce who look like they are compromising, who look like they don't think they deserve what they are asking for in terms of the role, in terms of the compensation, in terms of anything that is coming their way. I just want to reiterate that is not how you should be feeling. One, stay confident. You've done something in the past. You know what you're doing. You know how a professional setup is. Two, you obviously have expertise in some area that you want to apply for. So go with that confidence and speak exactly how you would have even before, or the first time you came into a job. The third thing is, I strongly believe it's okay to ask for help. You don't have to look like you have everything under control all the time. When it comes to work, make sure you ask for something that's a little flexible if that's what you need. Maybe it can be something as simple as, I need to leave every day at 4 o'clock to pick up my kid from school or from the creche, or I need to come in a little late, but here's how I'm going to manage it. What a manager or what someone on the professional side of things wants to know is that work will get done. They will figure out how to make it happen, but as long as you're not making excuses to not do the work, it'll get done. So that's something you need to keep in mind. And for someone who's a new mother, or someone who's just looking at a new life stage, you don't have to have all the answers. It's okay. We understand that multitasking can be hard. There is a huge percentage of your time and energy that goes into looking after things that are at home, which no one else can do on your behalf. But there is a whole side of things at work that someone else can maybe pick up for you. Someone else can maybe help you out with. So ask for that help where you need it. And it's okay if you don't have all of the answers at work or at home. Just be true to yourself and be as transparent as you can with the team that you're eventually going to work with, and it should be okay. But what I want to really emphasize on is that a company's culture is key. So don't go to a place where you already, maybe you've heard that the culture is bad. They're not understanding. They're not flexible. You have really long working hours, and it's not something that is feasible long term. I would recommend you stay away from those places. There are many ways to look at companies that have good culture. Some of them, for example, you can see a lot about a company's life on, say, their Instagram pages, which is not necessarily all professional, but they bring out what their life is like outside of work. They bring out what what they do for teams across countries. So these are all things that you should look at. Look at their LinkedIn pages. Now LinkedIn, most companies for that matter, have a life at whatever page. So let's take Facebook as an example. There will possibly be a page which says life at Facebook, or life at Meta, life at Google, life at InMobi, life at whichever company. You should look at those pages and see what people are saying about it. Go online and read about culture on, say, Glassdoor or Ambition Box or Fishbowl. There are a bunch of these platforms, but if you just do a little research, you will know well enough whether this is a space that will nurture you as you grow, or it's just going to make your life harder. So that is something that I really wanted to emphasize on, because it makes a whirlwind of difference. We also live in an age where you don't necessarily have to go into office all 5 days, right? There are certain companies that demand it, but there are a plethora of companies that are looking at remote work, that are looking at hybrid work. You need to pick what works for you based on the life stage that you're at. So that is something that I think you should do. And when I talk about easing back to work, which is the last point on this slide, what I'm trying to say is practice your routine. If it's something that you haven't done for a while, you haven't done a 9 to 5, you haven't been able to deal with the whole thing, and it gets a little overwhelming, especially if you have a newborn child, practice the process. I'll give you an example of someone that told me something in our workplace. She took her maternity break and she wanted to come back. She took I think about 2 weeks of buffer to just ease into the process. She enrolled in a creche well in advance, and she started putting her child in that creche 2 weeks before she had to actually come back to work. So everyone got into a routine. Your teething issues were sorted out. Anything that could go wrong, you were aware of. And when she actually had to come back, she was not overwhelmed. She was a little calm, and everything was as good as it could have been given the circumstances. So yeah, ease your way back into work is what I would talk about. We can move to the next slide. What I want to talk about here is why your LinkedIn profile is important. To give you some context, a lot of recruiters right now, LinkedIn is definitely more expensive than Naukri and a few of the other platforms, but a lot of recruiters still go on LinkedIn to look for people who are passive, because a lot of your job sites, say for example, Naukri, IIM, Monster, Shine, Quicker, all of these, they're all services where you predominantly will find active job seekers, right? People who are looking for work are likely to come up there. LinkedIn, however, is a little different. It's a professional networking platform, which means we can also look for people who are not looking for jobs. Now, in those cases, this is why it's important. Now, here are two examples, right? I've just taken two arbitrary screenshots of two people in the professional setup. You have something on the left which basically says head of product marketing, and then there are a few key responsibilities. It's not too much, but it is enough to tell me what the person does. Whereas on the right side, you have a VP of data science, but all he's got over there, or all she's got over there, are designations and nothing really about what the role is. So when a recruiter is going to search for a certain role, now let's say I look for someone who's done data sciences, I will put in certain words, or any recruiter for that matter is going to put in a certain search string to narrow down the search. This profile may be really good, albeit it's not going to come up in the search. It's not going to come up because nothing has been written about their role, nothing has been written about anything that is likely to throw an algorithm match for someone. So even if your last job was 2 years ago, 3 years ago, write something about it, and make sure at least in your heading or in your summary description, you call out something about what you've done, what you want to do, so that those words come out, if nothing else. So yeah, that is why your LinkedIn profile is important. You should go onto LinkedIn. You should, if all of you on the call are looking to re-enter the workforce, you should turn on your badge which says open to work. And on LinkedIn, Google people, look up or, kind of do searches on recruiters in certain companies that you're trying to go after. And you can write to them. You can say that I'm looking to re-enter the workforce. Can you help me with, XYZ? Now, don't send arbitrary messages because recruiters tend to get a lot of spam. If there is a role, for example, that you see that you think you're a good fit for, you should probably send a link to that and say, hi, I've applied to this. I really think I'll be good for this. Can you please help me, have a look at it? Stuff like that. That's how you network. That's how you kind of get into a larger system or a larger network in general. Yeah, we can go to the next slide. The next slide is generally about your CV. Now, I was told by the organizers that, there are a lot of questions that are coming around CVs. So let me just break a few myths for you from a recruiting angle. It's not a two-way conversation, so I can't ask and wait for responses, but maybe we can put it on chat. Let's do that. How long do you think a person spends per CV? Before we decide yes or no? Let's take a minute and have some answers on chat. How long do you think a recruiter looks at your CV before they decide yes or no? Five to 7 minutes, okay. Let's have a few more answers. We have close to 30 people on call. It shouldn't be difficult to do this. Anyone else? Any guesses? Any answer is fine. Let's hear you out. Okay, I don't think we're getting too many more answers, so I'll go ahead. It's very far away from 5 to 7 minutes. I don't think a recruiter spends more than 10 to 12 seconds on a CV. And that is because we get a plethora of CVs to look at. And with time, we can tell very quickly if something is going to work or not. So the first myth that I want to bust is that the length of one CV does not have any involvement with how good one is. So what I mean is, if you have a 4-page, 5-page, 6-page CV, it doesn't mean that gets you a higher notch of importance in our eyes. What we look for is the important stuff, and we'll get to it. But we look at something which is called eyeballing of a CV, which means we very quickly we do a cursory read, and we look for certain things to pop up. And if that doesn't come, we move to the next one very quickly. I also wanted to cover that it's not only a manual thing that we're talking about where recruiters go CV after CV. The world has moved to a lot of automation. So we have things called an application tracking system. It's called an ATS, where a lot of CVs come and sit. Now, there are various companies that do this. There's Darwinbox, there's Kenexa, there's SuccessFactors, there's there's HireCraft. There are a whole bunch of ATSs, and various companies use various ATSs. But what this ATS does, it parses your information. So it takes all of the information on your CV and puts it in a certain order for a recruiter to look at. Now, there are also a whole bunch of tools and platforms in the market which will now do source and match or search and match, which basically means that the system has a JD in place and a recruiter says, this is important for me. And the entire, let's say 200 applications are in a few seconds filtered. And the system will then give us about 10 good ones in that list. Now, all you need is for the important stuff to be on your CV. Your CV is not your autobiography or, for us to understand absolutely everything you've done from when you were in school. Stick to what's important, and that's all that matters. But here are a few things on formatting a CV. I'm not going to go point by point. It's pretty self-explanatory. The only piece of advice I would give you is do not, or rather refrain from saving your CV in a JPEG format or any format other than Word and PDF, because those are what systems are able to understand easily and quickly. Yeah, we can move to the next slide. Cool. This is what I was talking about, and everything that you saw in the previous slide is covered here. There's a stark difference between the profile on the left and the profile on the right. Now, even if the profile on the right has good information, is a really good CV, it is very likely that your eye will cross it and you will move to the next one. So what is important? Is it the picture? Is it the color? Is it the stars that you see at the bottom? No, not really. What we're looking for is something that is compact, precise, and to the point. So let's just talk a little bit about the CV on the left. I've just taken something off the internet to give you an example, but it's very clear, right? There are enough spaces and demarcations between someone's designation. On the left of the designation under work history, I can see exactly how long they were in that company. So I can then decide, is there a stability issue? Is this person moving too often? Or is everything all right from that sense? Even under education, it doesn't cover too much information that's not necessary. For example, I've seen a lot of CVs which say, 10th standard, this board, this mark, 12th standard, this. It doesn't matter. 12th maybe matters if you're someone very junior in the workforce, but for the most of it, what we're looking for is to see what is your highest qualification, what have you done before that, and which year did you do it in, maybe. And which university, because in certain cases that holds a lot of value. But what I like about the CV on the left is that it has designation, it has company, location, and then 4 bullet points on what this person does. Now, a sales manager, if I were to just explain it to the larger crowd, can easily write a CV that will last a page and a half. But I'm not going to look at it. Or rather, let me speak on behalf of the recruiting community. We're not going to look at it. What we want should be in the first 3-4 lines, which is whatever is important. Same with everything that you see on the personal information side. You have everything very clearly written out. It is not paragraphs worth of stuff, and it doesn't have relevant stuff. Like, for example, hobbies. For example, maybe something that you excelled at in school, like, you were captain of a cricket team or captain of the dance team. When you're looking at a role after 2-3 years of being in the professional setup, all of that doesn't matter. So stick to what's important. I'm not saying you have to force fit your CV into 1 page. 2 is fine. 3 is pushing it. Like I said, we spend 5, 7, maximum of 10 seconds on a CV. It's very unlikely that we're even going to go to page 3. Even the ATS, it's very unlikely. The other thing I want to also explain to you from a recruiting angle is, if what is relevant is on page 3 or page 4, we automatically have a notion that you haven't done it recently, so you're not going to be relevant for us. So whatever is tapering towards the bottom of your profile automatically seems like you have put it at the bottom, because for you also it is not that relevant, and whatever is on top is what matters. So make sure that your first page stands out. It has everything that one needs to look at. Your phone number should be easy. It's also fine to put it in a header and a footer. That is another way to do it, and it's quite common. But make sure it's at a place that's easy to look at. Some people put their phone numbers right at the bottom of their CV. That's fine. It's just easier if it's right on top, because if I like the profile, I have the number immediately to look at and call. So yeah, that's a little bit about how a good CV looks. Like I said, 2 pages is good. 3 is, it's moving to a territory that's not needed. Let's talk a little bit about the profile on the right now. This person has good qualifications. This person has done good work from a technical perspective, right? They've done graphic designing. They've done, their achievements is something that's noteworthy. But the formatting falls flat. And that is why formatting is key. And that's why we covered the slide before this, which talks about how you format a profile. You can pick up a standard profile from Word. You can draft your own profile. You can look online and see what some general profiles look like. Um, but just make sure that it is formatted well, it is spaced well. Even on the profile on the right, if there was a space between qualification and the four or five points, that itself would have made a difference. I'm not saying you need, like I said, I'm not saying you need to have color and pictures and like all of that, but just something that is formatted well, something that captures exactly what's needed is good. Now, let's take another example. Imagine we have Juhi's profile on the left and we have the profile on the right in this format, but 3 pages long. Which one are you likely to pick? If their profiles look fairly similar, their work is fairly similar, your eyeball automatically goes to the one that's well written out and well spaced and well formatted. Brownie points if what you've written is exactly what you do and exactly, it aligns to one's job description, then that much of a higher likeliness that you're going to get picked for an interview in that company. The other thing that you should remember when it comes to your resume is the first word in each sentence matters. So I'll give you an example. Now, if you are part of a team that, does XYZ work, your first word is likely to be team member who did this or coordinated with people who did this. If the company that you're looking for is looking for someone who's a leader in the space, those words don't work for you because it tells them that you were not the sole person who did it, or you were not someone who has done the entire role. You were part of a larger team, which is fine. But I'm just trying to say your first word in each line matters. So if it's someone who's actually done the job, they will say things like, solely responsible for XYZ, single-handedly managed, or single point of contact for this, built, created reports. Those are the kind of things that come up. If you're looking at something technical, there is a difference when one looks at CVs which says managed maintenance of systems versus implemented end-to-end XYZ. So these are different ways of looking at it. Now, I don't know what genre all of you fall under, so I'm keeping it between a mix of tech and non-tech. But this is very important because this is the first thing that one sees before even deciding whether they want to speak to you further or not. So this needs to really come across well, and it needs to be precise. It needs to be to the point, and it needs to have the important stuff. Leave the rest for your interview. You can talk in detail about your projects in your interview. Both of these are non-tech examples. If we were talking about tech, I can give it to you in writing. Most people do not look at that professional technical summary where you talk about all of the technologies that you have experience in. People scroll straight down to projects. So your project needs to be clear. What was the title? What is the duration? And what was your role? Was it implementing? Was it consulting? Was it support? Was it techno-functional? All of that. And there you call out the technology that you've worked on with versions. Now, say, for example, you're looking at front-end development. You talk about which version of Angular you've worked on, stuff like that. And that you explain in about 3-4 bullet points exactly what you've been doing in that project and what is the extent of your contribution to it. So yeah, that's everything I wanted to cover from a resume standpoint. We can move to the next slide, which basically opens it up to some examples that I can see that I saw online, which I just wanted to call out. I'm not endorsing these companies in any way, but I'm saying that there are a whole bunch of companies that look at back to work programs, and this is all India. So Deloitte, Amazon, Goldman Sachs, SAP, IBM, I know that Kohler also does it. There's InMobi that does it. Everyone looks, for a lack of better way of explaining it, there are certain goals that are taken company-wide to say that we want diversity, we want to be able to encourage women to come back. So you should look it up. You should see I've gone through most of these websites myself, so I can see that there are active roles against them. Look at what is relevant for you. Do a little bit of web crawling and check out other companies that you want to, um, and see what's out there. And hopefully all of what we've discussed today should help you, put yourself out there better, sound a little more confident, make sure you know exactly what you're asking for, and then you should be good. But yeah, thank you so much for your time, and this is what I wanted to cover.